Hey, what's going on everyone? Joker here. I hope you're all doing well. Today we are going to be taking a look at a system that I have been wanting to do over the past few months, but I was waiting for the new Ryzen 2000 series CPUs to be coming out, and this has just been the perfect time to go ahead and throw together a sort of semi-mid-range to budget Fortnite streaming PC that would be perfect for any of you would-be streamers out there for whatever you want to stream for that matter. If you're wanting to stream at 1080p, and 60 frames per second and getting good quality using software encoding as opposed to hardware encoding, then that is kind of what this PC is going after, although it would make just a perfect gaming PC all on its own, even if you aren't doing streaming for 1080p as well as 1440p gaming at high settings. So we're going to go over all the parts in this build. We'll touch on the performance of streaming versus not streaming in a game like Fortnite, and of course benchmarking through a series of titles as well. Now, if you saw in my one of my most recent videos, I was talking about where I had a lot of problems with this PC initially. Thankfully, I was able to get that narrowed down to just having a bad DisplayPort connector on the graphics card that I'm using here. So all the other parts in here, no issues with them that I can honestly report. And if you want links to any of them, I'll have them down over to Amazon in the description below, which are affiliate links. They do help to support the channel if you decide to use them. So total cost on the system that we have here today is around $1,300 in its current configuration, although there are definitely some areas where you could shave off some cost if you're wanting to bring down the budget to under $1,000, let's say. There are definitely a few areas where you could save some money, and we will go over those when we're going through all the different parts here on the system. But let's start with the case. This is the NZXT H500, recently released, selling for $70. Really good value actually at that price. They have a higher end version called the H500i, but this is the cheaper one at $70. You could definitely tell in some of the areas where they're keeping down the cost on this compared to some of the maybe the higher end chassis out there. Things like using thinner metals as well as the tempered glass side panel, which is also very, very thin compared to other more expensive cases I've seen. These are some of the areas you can kind of tell where they're keeping down cost in this, but nothing that really takes away from overall design and layout of the case, which is actually pretty good for a low end all the way up to a high end system, as they've even got a mounting structure in here where you can put a reservoir if you're wanting to do a full-on custom loop. So that's something you can definitely do in this case, as having a piece of hardware like this is pretty much designed for it. I mentioned it does have a tempered glass side panel, which is a little bit on the thin side, but I do appreciate the way that they are choosing to implement it here with a single screw on the back side, which when you release that, the tempered glass actually will pull forward. So it's a much better system than some of the typical ones we usually see out there with the 4 thumb screws on the actual glass. This helps to kind of keep it away from you actually having to touch it, and it also has a piece of metal on the back side that it's attached to, so you never really have to put your fingers on the glass too much if you're wanting to take apart the system and put it back together. So that's definitely a nice thing to see here on the H500. You could also do a 240 or 280 millimeter radiator in the front. I opted to just run 2 140 millimeter fans in here. They actually have the front panel can actually kind of slide out here, and you can go ahead and screw on your radiator and fans outside of the case and then just slot it back in. This is definitely something that I appreciate as a system builder. Trying to put in like a radiator with fans at the same time as one person without having a third hand is it's not impossible, but it is a minorly difficult task to do. So having something like this that you could slide out and then put in makes the job just a whole lot easier if you're doing it by yourself. We've also got some toolless SSD trays on top of the power supply shroud here, which you can move around as it just attaches into the perforations of the PSU shroud. So you can move them around left and right. You could turn them sideways if you want to. Since I was just running a single 2.5-inch SSD, I opted to just put it centered and turned it horizontal, and that's the end result that you could see there with the custom cable sticking out from the side. Now, getting on to some of the good stuff, as this is meant to be a streaming PC, I am running the Ryzen 2600. You could get the 2600X, which is going to be a little bit more at around $20 to $30 if you don't want to overclock it yourself, but the 2600 you can get for $189. I've even seen it for as low as $189 over on Amazon, and if you can overclock it yourself, then you're going to be absolutely golden, because it's going to be good for streaming as well as gaming. Of course, Intel has their 6-core competitors, although that's not hyper-threaded, but they can clock faster. So if you're more interested for just gaming, around the same price, you can get the Intel part for maybe just a little bit more, and that'll have a higher clock speed. But if you're wanting the extra threads of the Ryzen CPUs with 12 threads, then it's going to be a better, price performance comparison versus Intel, especially if you are wanting to stream. And I mentioned if you do want to overclock it, you can. This Ryzen 2600, I was able to shoot it up to 4.2 gigahertz at 1.375 volts, and it was stable at that for all of my testing. I am running it inside of the MSI X470 Gaming 7 AC motherboard. It is a pretty high-end motherboard at $229 for just a few extra features than what you're seeing on some of their lower-end boards. So this is definitely one of those areas where you could choose to save yourself some money if you're wanting to bring down the budget. They have their cheapest MSI board is for $130, and they have like 2 more variants kind of in the middle, so you can kind of choose what's more important to you based on some of the extra features. This one, since it's one of the higher end boards, you've got a lot of connectivity options on the back. You've got Wi-Fi, it's got Bluetooth, pretty much everything you would want to see on a motherboard over $200. It even supports 2 M.2 drives. I am running an ADATA XPG drive in one of these here for my boot, but that's not something you need to do, so I'm not really even factoring that into the budget. I'm just going under the assumption most people would probably just get a single SSD and maybe a mechanical hard drive, which we'll touch on shortly here. Cooling the Ryzen 2600, which I mentioned, I got to 4.2 gigahertz, running the Kraken M22. It's a 120 millimeter AIO, which I have rear mounted with the fan pulling all of the hot air out of the case, so that's keeping the overclocked CPU under 60 degrees Celsius the vast majority of the time when I was playing games. It's about an $80 cooler, but again, this is one of the areas where you could save yourself some money. So if you decided to just use the Wraith cooler that comes along with the Ryzen 2600, then you could just go ahead and use that. You could save some money on the motherboard, and then you're already down almost like $200 just by getting a cheaper motherboard and not using an all-in-one water cooler. So that's what I meant by saying you could do this system for around $1,000 if you skimp in a few different little areas. For the RAM here, that's something I would not cut back on. I'm running the G.Skill Sniper X at 3400 megahertz, nice and fast for Ryzen, 16 gigabytes. Perfect for today's gaming needs and also for streaming. If you are looking to get RAM for Ryzen, I would steer you anywhere 3000 megahertz and up. This G.Skill Sniper X RAM does run stable at 3400 in all the systems I've used it in so far, so I can definitely recommend this. Also, like Corsair Vengeance at 3000. Pretty much any G.Skill, anything G.Skill is doing that's approved to run on Ryzen, you could probably trust in those clock speeds pretty well. For the graphics on this, I'm running the PowerColor RX 580 Red Devil card, which runs at 1380 megahertz out of the box. You could find these right now actually on Amazon for around $310, although they do have a cheaper version called the Red Dragon card, which is selling for $290, which compared to what we've seen in the past months, with the mining boom and everything like that and cards being so overpriced, seeing these cards under $300 on some of the variants is definitely refreshing, as that's pretty much around MSRP for what these cards should be. Now, for the power in here, I'm running an EVGA 750 watt PSU. It is gold rated, fully modular and all of that. And I've got that hooked up with some sleeved extensions. These are actually done by Aaron over at WazMods, who does some really great cables if you want to get some custom cables at all. I'll leave a link to his website down in the description below as well. They can kind of help spruce up your build. Not something you need to do or factor into your cost really, but if it's a little extra thing that you want to do later on after you've already set up the system, then this is definitely a good way to do it. Now for storage on here, I mentioned I'm using an M.2 drive for my boot drive, which we're not factoring in, but I've got a 500 gigabyte Samsung 860 EVO drive, which is something that you should look at getting, either a 500 or 256 gigabyte, and then pairing that up with a mechanical drive, as AMD pushed out their Store MI now with the recent lineup of CPUs, the new Ryzen CPUs. You can actually take advantage of that. So if you wanted to do something like get a 2 terabyte mechanical drive and then throw in a smaller SSD later on down the road, you can use that as part of a tiered storage solution, which is better than a cache. I talked about this all in a recent video if you want to go back and check that out, but it's a good way to kind of get a big mechanical drive at the beginning and then throw in an SSD later on, and you could still get SSD like boot speeds even though you may be having the mechanical drive running in the lead there inside of your tiered storage solution. So definitely look into Store MI if you are trying to put together a build on a budget and you don't really want to pay through the nose for a large SSD right out of the gate. And Windows 10 also, I don't usually factor into the cost on builds because you can pretty much find them for like $10-15 online. I'll have a link down below over to SCDKey. You can get one over there, usually around $10 to $15. eBay will have them even cheaper if you want to go that route. So Windows 10, you don't have to worry about spending $100 on that. Just go ahead and get it from a key site or eBay and call it a day. So when it came to streaming Fortnite, the Ryzen 2600 was able to handle it very well using a bitrate of 6000 in OBS, just software encoding. I wasn't using any sort of hardware encoding at all, just doing it all using the Ryzen 2600 while gaming on the RX 580, and I was streaming at 1080p 60 FPS, and I was playing at 1080p on high settings for the comparison that you'll be seeing right now. And you can see that even though I'm streaming on the one side of the screen here, it is taking a very small performance hit, and you really aren't going to notice that too much when you're actually playing the game, seeing a drop of about maybe 5 to 7 FPS at most. You're not going to really be able to feel that too much in the game, especially when you're running off of something like an RX 580 and you're already getting over 100 frames per second no matter what in a title like Fortnite, which just really isn't that demanding. So really the outlier here would be the CPU and trying to actually process everything if you want to get a good quality stream where the viewers aren't being dropped frames either. The Ryzen 2600 can perfectly do that here, which again, I do have overclocked to 4.2 gigahertz, but even if you're not overclocking it, I mean, you can go with the 2600X there and you'll be good pretty much either way there. During the run that you did see there, I did capture average and 1% low of the FPS, which I'll be showing you right now. You could see that running the game just at 1080p, not streaming at all, I got an average of 115 FPS, while when streaming, got an average of 109 FPS. So a difference of 6 frames per second there, and the 1% low went from 94 when I was not streaming down to 86 when I was streaming, so an 8 FPS difference there in the 1% lows. But either way, you can see there for 1080p streaming at 60 FPS, you know, playing it on your end, you're definitely gonna be able to stay over 60 frames per second at 1080p and still pumping out 60 FPS to all of your viewers. Now, of course, Fortnite isn't the only game that I wanted to test. I did want to run it through a few other titles out there, at least ones that are particular of interest to me that I like to benchmark on any new card. So I did test through some games here at 1080p and 1440p, and as you'll see in some of the side-by-sides, the RX 580 surprisingly can handle 1440p pretty well. There are some more demanding titles where you won't be able to run it at high settings and getting over 60 FPS, but you'll see a few drops maybe down below 60, but still very smooth gameplay, especially if you're using something like a FreeSync monitor, which I was using in all the testing I was doing here. That's kind of one of the reasons you would maybe go with the RX 580 over a GTX 1060, even though they pretty much go neck and neck when it comes to actual game performance. You do have the option of getting a FreeSync monitor and pairing that with the RX 580, while the 1060 you'd have to get a G-Sync one. It's going to cost a hell of a lot more to do that, and with games having as much fluctuation as they will on kind of a mid-end card at 1440p, you're going to want to get something that's going to be able to help handle the variable refresh rate, and G-Sync is just more expensive. It could be better, worse, whatever. At the end of the day, it's more expensive, and if you've got an unlimited budget, of course, I guess you can go with the highest end G-Sync monitor, but seeing fluctuating frame rates in some of these games here, I would want to be on the FreeSync if I was kind of more on the budget side of things. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 1080 and 1440p numbers in the games that I did test here. You can see that at 1440p, the only game that dropped down below 60 FPS on the average was Far Cry 5, while at 1080p it was averaging 76 FPS, and 1440p still very playable in that title, and also all of the other games here, 1080 and 1440p, the RX 580 is rocking out with the Ryzen 2600, so really awesome to see here that it's still kicking ass in these games here in 2018. But that is going to about wrap it up here for the Fortnite Streaming PC build. If you have any questions about something that I maybe didn't cover in the video, then leave them down in the comments below and I'll try to answer as many of you as possible. If you want links to any of the parts here that I did use in the system, as I mentioned towards the start of the video, I'll have those down in the description over to Amazon, where you can help support the channel by spending some money over there. I get a couple bucks kickback, so definitely appreciate it when you guys do use those links. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like on it down below and subscribe if you're not already. And if you have been here for a while, you can always ring the notification bell so you never miss a moment of content here on the channel. And I'll catch you guys next time. Sarah.